Every conversation about attachment styles eventually arrives here. After the anxious spiraling, the avoidant walls, the trauma bonds and the silent treatments, and the cycles that seem impossible to break, there is this question: is there another way? Is it actually possible to be in a relationship where you don't feel like you're constantly auditioning, or constantly suffocating, or constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop? The answer is yes, but it's more complicated than most people make it sound. Because secure attachment isn't a personality type you either have or you don't. It isn't a destination you arrive at after enough therapy. And it isn't the absence of fear or pain or difficulty in relationships. It is something more specific, more learnable, and more within reach than most people who've spent years in insecure attachment patterns believe. This video is about what secure attachment actually is, what it looks like from the inside, and, most importantly, whether it's something you can build. Secure attachment, in its simplest definition, is the capacity to form close emotional bonds without being overwhelmed by the fear of losing them. It develops like all attachment styles in early childhood, when a caregiver is consistently responsive to a child's emotional needs, not perfectly responsive. Consistency doesn't mean perfection. It means that when the child is distressed, the caregiver shows up often enough and attuned enough that the child develops a fundamental expectation. When I need someone, someone will be there. That expectation, internalized before the child has language for it, becomes the foundation of how they relate to others for the rest of their life. As an adult, securely attached people are not immune to relationship pain. They get hurt. They feel jealous sometimes. They have conflicts. They experience loss. But their nervous system processes these experiences differently. A securely attached person can tolerate uncertainty without it becoming consuming. They can express needs directly without catastrophizing about the response. They can handle conflict without it feeling like the end of the relationship. They can be vulnerable without it feeling like a risk that might destroy them. And perhaps most importantly, they can be alone without it feeling like abandonment. What does this actually look like in practice? Because secure attachment is often described in abstract terms that are hard to translate into the texture of a real relationship. A securely attached person, when their partner doesn't text back for a few hours, notices the silence and moves on with their day. Not because they don't care, but because their nervous system doesn't interpret silence as threat. When conflict arises, they feel uncomfortable, sometimes very uncomfortable, but they move toward it rather than away from it. They say the difficult thing. They stay in the conversation. They trust that the relationship can survive disagreement. When they feel a need for reassurance, for space, for closeness, for a difficult conversation, they communicate it directly. Not perfectly, not without fear, but without the layers of strategy and second guessing that insecure attachment produces. They say what they mean, and they mean what they say. And when a relationship ends, because secure attachment doesn't protect you from loss, they grieve fully and eventually move forward. Not because they care less, but because their identity doesn't depend on the relationship's survival. Here is something crucial that gets lost in most discussions of attachment. Secure attachment is not the same as being easy to be with. Securely attached people have boundaries. They end relationships that aren't working. They disappoint people. They say no. They tolerate the discomfort of someone else's anger without collapsing or retaliating. They are in many ways harder to manipulate than insecurely attached people, because their self-worth doesn't depend on external validation. This is why secure attachment can initially feel unfamiliar or even uncomfortable to someone who grew up in insecure dynamics. A securely attached partner who doesn't play games, who says what they mean, who doesn't pursue or withdraw strategically, can feel almost suspicious to an anxiously attached person. Where's the tension? Where's the chase? Why aren't they harder to read? The nervous system, trained on unpredictability, doesn't know what to do with consistency. It reads safety as boredom. It reads stability as lack of passion. Learning to reinterpret those signals, to recognize calm as safety rather than indifference, is one of the central tasks of moving towards secure attachment. Now, the question that matters most: can you develop secure attachment if you didn't grow up with it? The research says yes, Clearly and consistently, yes. Psychologists call this earned secure attachment, and studies suggest that a significant portion of securely attached adults did not start that way. They moved toward security through experience, through relationships, romantic, therapeutic, or otherwise, that provided consistent, attuned connection over time. Through deliberate self-reflection and the development of what psychologists call coherent narrative, the ability to make sense of your own history, to understand how your early experiences shaped your patterns without being defined or controlled by them. Mary Main, one of the most important attachment researchers after Bowlby, found that what predicted secure attachment in adults was not having had a perfect childhood. It was having made sense of whatever childhood you had. The capacity to say, this happened, it affected me in these specific ways, and I am not the same as what happened to me. That coherence, that ability to hold your own story with clarity and compassion, is itself a form of security. So what does moving towards secure attachment actually require? The first thing is exactly what we just described, making sense of your story, not ruminating on it, not being consumed by it, but understanding it, knowing which patterns you carry, where they came from, and how they show up in your relationships. That understanding doesn't automatically change behavior, but it creates the self-awareness that makes change possible. The second thing is corrective relational experiences. Your attachment system was shaped by relationships, and it heals in relationships. This can be a therapeutic relationship, which is why good therapy is so effective for attachment work. But it can also be a friendship, a romantic relationship with someone who has more secure patterns than you, a mentor, a community. Any relationship where you experience being seen consistently, where ruptures are repaired, where you can be vulnerable without being punished, is a corrective experience. Over time, these experiences don't just change your thoughts about relationships. They change your nervous system's baseline expectation of them. The third thing is tolerating the discomfort of new patterns. Moving towards security means doing things that feel unnatural, expressing a need directly when every instinct says to suppress it or dramatize it, staying in a difficult conversation when every instinct says to shut down or pursue, letting someone be close when every instinct says to find the exit. These moments of acting against the grain of your old pattern are uncomfortable in a very specific way. They feel wrong, even when they're right. Learning to distinguish between discomfort that signals danger and discomfort that signals growth is one of the most important skills in this process. The fourth thing is self-compassion, and this one is harder than it sounds for people who grew up in insecure attachment, because insecure attachment often comes with an internalized critic, a voice that says you're too much or not enough, or fundamentally flawed in some way that makes you hard to love. Moving towards security means gradually, painstakingly, replacing that voice with something more accurate. Not toxic positivity, not false reassurance, just the same compassion you would extend to someone you love who was struggling with the same things you're struggling with. Secure attachment is not a fixed state. It's not something you achieve and then keep forever unchanged. It fluctuates. It can be destabilized by loss, by stress, by relationships with people who activate old patterns. A person who has built earned security can find themselves back in anxious or avoidant patterns under enough pressure. That's not failure. That's the nature of nervous systems. They respond to environment. What changes with earned security is not that you never get dysregulated. It's that you recover faster. You recognize the pattern sooner. You have more tools. And you trust, from experience rather than just from hope, that you are capable of finding your way back. That trust in yourself, in the process, in the possibility of connection that doesn't cost you everything, is what secure attachment actually feels like from the inside. Not the absence of fear, the knowledge that fear doesn't have to run the show. The next video looks at one of the most disorienting modern relationship experiences, ghosting. What's actually happening in the mind of someone who disappears, and what it means and doesn't mean about you. Leave a comment with one word that describes how this video made you feel. I'll see you in the next one.